morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Better Business Bureau serving the Northwest. My name is Jade Garcia, and I am the Public Relations Coordinator at your local Better Business Bureau. Today, we have the opportunity to hear from Neil Custer, founder and president of Reveal Digital Forensics and Security and Custer Agency Incorporated, and Brad Frazier, an attorney with Hawley Troxell Law Firm, and Dylan Evans, Vice President of Digital Forensics and Custer Agency Incorporated. Custer Agency Incorporated is a private investigation, computer forensic, and security firm located in Boise, Idaho, and it has been a BBB accredited business since 1995. If you have any questions at any time throughout the presentation, please type them in the question section and we will do our best to adjust them during the webinar, during Q&A. Now that that is all out of the way, thank you for all joining us, and the presentation is now all yours, Neil.
Thank you very much, and appreciate the opportunity to present today. What we are going to hopefully go through today is kind of three areas with the three of us. I'm going to kind of lay some foundation for cybersecurity for businesses and kind of set the stage for this for Brad's presentation and for Dylan's presentation. So we're going to talk about, again, the foundation or critical asset paradigm that I put together. And then we'll turn it over to Brad and have him talk about why you as business owners should care. What's in it for you and what's not in it for you. And then Dylan's going to wrap it up with talking about the human link and what kind of things can be done and what our vulnerabilities are regarding the human factor in this whole thing. So starting out, this is a model that I've developed over time, and I'm going to kind of zip through this and explain a little bit. It'll help us put into perspective, I think, the whole idea of security when it comes to cybersecurity, information security. Actually, it applies to almost any type of security. And so we'll walk through this. And the first thing that we always do is consider, what is our threat? What might attack us as far as getting our information? And I've broken this down into two categories: the internal threat and the external threat. The internal threat, obviously, is anybody who has legitimate access to our systems, to our information, be it employees, contractors, etc., anybody who has authorized access. And the external threat is those who do not have authorized access, and that could be your hacker, your nation state, or your government agency that might be trying to hack into you, or some other kind of person who might want to find out your information, to download your information. And then when I talk about critical assets, I'm really meaning anything that you have, any of your assets, your information assets, that the loss of which could cause a significant impact on the viability of your company. So you're not going to worry about those things that don't apply to that definition. So one of the next things that you'll do, in addition to looking at your vulnerabilities or who might be attacking you, is you look at what assets are you trying to protect and identifying and where those assets are. So we have really three goals in our protecting our business assets, in particular our information business assets. We want to, first of all, prevent it from happening. And so this developing a good plan is going to help us develop a good prevention program. The second one is detection. If you have something in place that'll help you detect early any intrusion, then you're not going to have to go to the third step, which is mitigation, or it's damage control. And I think Brad is going to be talking a lot about the mitigation factor, and why we want a good prevention program. So this is our countermeasures tool, or our categories that we need to follow in putting a plan together. And I'm going to break these down into the first. Obviously, we have to do an assessment of our situation. That includes identifying our critical assets, identifying our threats, and this is extremely important that we do our homework out front. We figure out what kind of hardware we have. We look at the whole system. What kind of training? Do we have a plan in place? So this is kind of your benchmark to start from, is an assessment, and then a plan development as a result of that assessment. Now, why do we do that? And Brad's going to talk more about this. Is we want to have, at least meet our minimum standards, our compliance, and to have best practices or industry standards. Now, that's not necessarily the best security program, but that's the baseline. That's where we want to be at a minimum. We want to comply with any laws, rules, regulations that are out there, and we want to develop best practices in our particular industry. So that's another thing you'll have to find out. What are you supposed to comply with? And that's part of what Brad will cover. So the other thing that we talked a little bit about is we got to know what kind of hardware we have, what kind of software we have. Is our software updated? Where is our computer system located? Are we in a flood control zone, and do we have the computers in the basement? These are all issues that we need to know. Where is the data itself stored? And so in our assessment, we need to understand the design and control and where everything is. Is it in the cloud? Do we know how secure the cloud is? So those are all issues that you need to evaluate when you're evaluating your program. So also you need to look at the roles, responsibilities, and accountability, particularly as it relates to the human element. What roles have you given your employees as far as handling data? What are their responsibilities? And are they being held accountable for that? That's not just employees, that's your vendors. Are your vendors being careful with your data? The next one is education, training, and awareness. And this is extremely critical, and Dylan will be going into great more detail on this and talking about why the human factor, again, training and educating our human factor, and that's not just employees, that's our contractors, to make sure they're up to speed on how they're supposed to be handling the data. Now, I always end up with insurance. That's becoming more and more important and prominent. Probably there's very few of you haven't either have insurance, cyber insurance, or been contacted and asked about cyber insurance. And I think Brad will probably cover a little bit more of that information. So anyway, this is kind of how that looks again as we put that all together and how it relates with each other. And the thing that we need to remember in our programs are developing a plan, and that is all of this works together. We need to make sure we do the initial assessment, plan development. We need to implement that plan, test the plan, and adjust it as necessary. But it doesn't stop there. We need to do an annual review and adjusting the plan. And no plan's any good unless you continue to look at it, review it, and adjust it. And also, if you have an incident that happens, some type of a data breach, you need to, again, review your plan and adjust it accordingly. Very important that this be an ongoing process. So this is the model as it looks in its final stage. And again, these slides, I think, are available to you to download. So again, as a segue to Brad, is that do you really want to gamble? Do you really want to gamble with your data? If you don't have a program in place, that's exactly what you're doing. If you haven't evaluated your system. And one of the things that I always like to share with you in talking and working with the local FBI agent here in Boise and the cybercrime expert, he says if he as a FBI agent comes into a business that's had a data breach and they haven't done their due diligence, if they have been gambling and hoping that they don't have a problem, then he will just have no choice but to walk back out the door and say, that's your problem, not mine. And so that's kind of my segue over to Brad, and we'll answer questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil, and good morning, everyone. My name is Brad Fraser. I'm a partner in the Boise, Idaho law firm Hawley Troxell. Cybersecurity is one of my practice areas, and I am pleased to be able to share with you a few of my thoughts about human factors issues in cybersecurity matters. The advice and discussion this morning will be of a general nature. It's not to be construed as specific legal advice. So if you have legal questions about anything we talk about today, I would invite you to reach out to a lawyer in your particular jurisdiction to ask the follow-up questions. So Neil, with that, I think you're driving the deck. Would you mind advancing to the next slide, Neil, if you're able to do so? So we've titled this section of the presentation, Another Critical Human Factor Issue, Liability and Litigation. Much can be done on the front end to think about a cyber event and cybersecurity. You know, in general, I define cybersecurity as what do you do to protect the data sitting on a computer that's connected to the internet? That's the issue. Data, computer, internet. That's cybersecurity. So if none of your computers are connected to the internet, well, you really don't have much cybersecurity concerns. But we're all connected to the internet, and now even more so because we're all moving our stuff up to the cloud. And so cybersecurity is a concern to the extent you have any data, your data, customer data, third-party data, confidential data, trade secrets, whatever you might have sitting on a computer, whether it's your physical box or a box in the cloud, if it's connected to the internet or a network, there's a chance someone might get access to it. And that's the source of my biggest fear, is not so much that you can proactively, that's what Neil and Dylan and others do on the forensic side. They give you tools to proactively address the risk of a cyber event. But as a lawyer, I see the back end. People call their lawyers after there's been a hack. And in my experience, that's the real risk of a cyber event. Yes, it's unpleasant, and yes, you've been hacked, and yes, you have to mitigate that and address the hack from an IT perspective and an infrastructure perspective, yes. But what really happens is after the hack. That's where the most human factors exposures arise in my experience. And in my experience, there are 5 things that principally arise in terms of a legal risk or a legal exposure. So to Neil's earlier point, if you are thinking proactively about getting cyber insurance, you might want to make sure that your cyber liability insurance covers these 5 things. Now, there are many more things. This is just the top 5. I actually made a list, and there are probably 30 or 40 different legal risks that arise out of a cyber event, but these are my top 5. So let's take a few minutes together and review the top 5. The first is called your data breach reporting obligation. If you have a computer connected to a network and that computer suffers an incursion or a hack and data is lost, and some or all of that data constitutes personally identifiable information, PII, an email address, a physical address, a phone number, a social security number, then as a general rule, you have an obligation under the laws of almost all 50 states. I think at last count, 47 of the 50 states have what's called a data breach reporting obligation. That means that you must comply with that different state statute within the time required by that state. There is no overarching federal legislation on this point. So for example, if you have a computer connected to the internet, and let's say 10,000 customer records are hacked or lost, and the residents of, let's say, 28 different states are implicated, well, you have to comply with the potentially different obligations imposed on you by those 28 different states. So as soon as you learn there's a hack, you've got to find out all the implicated states and say, uh-oh, we've got 2 residents in Vermont and 3 in Texas and 15 in Colorado and 9 in Washington state. And you've got to figure out what your data breach reporting obligation is in each of those states. Because if you don't, you're subject to civil and potentially criminal penalties imposed by the attorney generals of that state. So, number one, if you have a hack, be immediately cognizant of your data breach reporting obligations. And by extrapolation, that should be the main thing that your cyber liability insurance covers, is data breach reporting. I was at a seminar recently, and the latest data I heard was that it costs between $40 and $100 per record to remediate and comply with your data breach reporting obligation. Well, if you happen to have, I guess, $200,000, $300,000 sitting around, and you can just throw that out the window to comply with the obligation of reporting to all of your affected customers or whomever, okay, but it makes sense to me to at least contemplate that as part of your insurance, your cyber liability insurance. And again, that's called data breach reporting obligation. Number 2 is that you'll get sued for negligence. This is becoming more and more popular. Plaintiffs' class action lawyers are suing people who allow their customers' data to be compromised for just plain old negligence. It's just no different than somebody slipping and falling on your sidewalk because you didn't shovel the snow. You were negligent to not protect the data. And this is a very useful theory for plaintiffs' lawyers to sue you and say, you were negligent. This is what's being used against LinkedIn and the LinkedIn privacy case. It's just simple, plain negligence. So we'll see more and more lawsuits against people who allow a hack, despite what you've done on the front end, regardless of how much money you spend in your IT infrastructure and all that stuff. Nonetheless, they're going to allege that you were negligent because you allowed the data to be hacked and corrupted. The third most common thing that we're seeing people getting sued for is breach of contract. Now, this may be subtle, but think about this for a minute. Each of you who has a website probably has a privacy policy on your website. In fact, if you do business with California, you're required to have a conspicuous privacy policy on your website that delineates what you do and how you treat personally identifiable information given to you by people who visit your website or your customers. When you have a privacy policy like that, that's a contract. And moreover, some of you may have signed non-disclosure agreements. That's a contract. So when you suffer an incursion or a hack, they're going to sue you for breach of contract because you say in the contract, well, we'll protect your data. Well, you didn't. You didn't protect it. It got hacked. And we're going to sue you for breach of contract. Now's the time for me to interpose and say, some of you might be saying, well, wait a minute, Brad. We've moved all of our data to the cloud. This is our cloud vendor's problem. And the answer is, no, it's not. That's the dirty little secret of moving data to the cloud, is that if you read your contract with Amazon Web Services or Rackspace or whoever you want to use for your cloud experience, the IBM Cloud, the much vaunted IBM Cloud, read your contract because it says, we are not responsible for data breach. We give you no warranty as to security, none. And we don't provide any of the data breach reporting obligations. So when you call your cloud vendor, unless of course you're Intel or Apple and you can negotiate that kind of a contract, but for a typical small business who has maybe 20,000 customer records and you want to move it up to the cloud, you get no protection for that. The cloud vendor specifically disclaims that liability. So again, cyber liability insurance that covers all of these things because your cloud vendor will not take care of you. I know this because I've actually written a number of the contracts for cloud vendors, and we disclaim all that liability. The fourth most common thing is what I've described here as a shareholder suit. That may not apply to you because you may not be publicly traded, but if you are a corporation or an LLC with members or shareholders, or if you're a big publicly traded company, if you allow a valuable trade secret to be compromised, like think, for example, what would happen to Coca-Cola if someone hacked in and took the formula for Coke? Well, the share value of Coke would go to zero, and all the shareholders would sue Coca-Cola and the board of directors for what's called a shareholder derivative suit, for allowing diminution of the stock price because you were negligent. And so if you suffer the loss of a trade secret, customer lists, a valuable recipe, whatever that is, and the value of the company is affected, you may be sued as a result of that. And then the fifth most common legal exposure that we're seeing is a function of your regulatory environment. If you work at all with PHI, which is personal health information, well, that's regulated by HIPAA. And if you're a financial institution, there's a separate body called, there's a separate law called GLB, Graham-Leach-Bliley. Each of those imposes on you much more aggressive regulatory requirements relative to how you treat personally identifiable information. Some states have a more aggressive regulatory environment. Massachusetts and California have much more difficult regulatory environments. So when you wake up that Monday morning and there's a text message waiting for you that says you've been hacked from your IT guy, these are the 5 things I think you need to start worrying about. You got to ask, what's my regulatory environment? Was PHI compromised? Am I a hospital? Am I a dentist? You know, so my recommendation is that as you're thinking about dealing with the post-hack repercussions, which is frankly where most of the legal and financial exposure lies, these are the top 5. And I would invite you to consider these 5 with your insurance agent and specifically make sure that your cyber liability insurance covers these 5 things. And trust me, you're going to have to push hard to get the right cyber liability insurance. It's not just like walking, I use the analogy, it's not like walking into a suit store if you're a guy. It's not like walking into a suit store and just picking any suit off the rack, you know. You got to try one on and make sure it fits. So aggressively work with a correct insurance company to provide you with insurance coverage. Now, I'm not an insurance agent and I don't sell insurance, but what I know is that very few people have the wherewithal to simply handle these 5 things without the intervention of insurance. It's just expensive. And you may be one of the few people who doesn't get sued, but my experience is that if you have a hack, you're going to get sued. So let's just be proactive about it and anticipate that you're going to get sued, and think about the ways to remediate it by doing what you can to plug the holes up front, but thinking that you're going to get sued, and then having the proper insurance in place. I'll leave you before I turn it back over to Dylan with one tip. Most, not all, but most of the state data breach reporting statutes say that you do not have to report if the data was encrypted. So my strong recommendation, in addition to obtaining cyber liability insurance, is to make sure that all of your data that's in the cloud or on a computer connected to the internet is encrypted. That doesn't solve all of your problems, but it will help as you think about proactive steps to deal with this new world of dealing with cyber liability and the events surrounding cybersecurity. So with that, I'll now turn it back over to my colleague, Dylan Evans, for the rest of the presentation. Dylan.
Thank you, Brad. I appreciate that. Just getting switched over to my slides right now. Apologies in advance if this is a little kludgy. I usually like to do mine as PDFs, but this machine is not one that has my favorite viewer on it. So I'll try to keep some of the other stuff out of the frame. Anyway, my name is Dylan Evans. As Jade introduced me earlier, I'm a digital forensic examiner here at Custer Agency. I've been working with computers many, many years. I've been a computer guy since I was probably in elementary school programming games, but I've also been a psychology person. I have my bachelor's degree in psychology, so I find this topic of social engineering really fascinating. As you can see here, textbook definition, social engineering is the clever manipulation of the natural human tendency to trust. Now, why is that important? When we think about cyber security, cyber liability, it's simply applied psychology. So no matter what, it's understanding how people think and how to make people think what you want them to think. This is the most critical thing to guard against. It doesn't matter what your industry is. This is where almost all data breaches and hacking incidents have this involved. You'll see on any given hacking movie that somebody sits in front of a computer and types really fast and says a lot of stuff, and that's hacking. Probably the only show I've ever seen that gets it right is Mr. Robot, because there's a lot of this really great social interaction. And really it's just, I mean, something as simple as somebody calls on the phone and assumes a position of authority and convinces somebody that, oh, hey, this is someone I need to help. How bad can social engineering be? Kaspersky claims that attacks against social networks are 10 times more effective than any other type of attacks. Every 1 in 500 emails contains confidential data. So when we combine those together, this is a lot of profit potential for potential social engineers, and it's an easy non-technical avenue for exploitation. So no matter, when you think about a hacker, you might think of somebody who's very tech savvy, has a lot of, oh, I have a great firewall, I have a great, paying for an antivirus, that none of that really matters when you think about social engineering. So we see social engineering in a lot of different fields: hackers, security consultants, spies, identity thieves, even online dating, con artists, recruiters, salespeople. It's any applied psychology. So let's look at how we actually motivate people. And the reason we go over this is you need to understand the threat before you understand how to defend against it. So any social engineering attempt, which is going to come through as an email, perhaps a phone call, someone in person, is going to have what I would call the carrot versus stick approach to human nature. So what causes a person to take or not take a given action? I say carrot versus stick as in reward versus punishment. So I either have something to gain or something I don't want to lose. A carrot incentive might be something that we can positively motivate somebody, and a stick incentive is negative motivation or fear of punishment. So carrot, greed, altruism, pity, and scarcity. We see altruism where given individuals' egos reinforced. We see pity where the ego is reinforced. Stick, the punishment motivators, job loss, humiliation, reputation loss, damage to social standing, probably little extreme physical injury, death, but anything that can motivate somebody, it's either going to give them something that they can look forward to or give them something that they don't want to happen. I think that's pretty clear. Robert Cialdini's Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion is a great book. I highly recommend anyone who's interested in this to pick it up. When we look at influence tactics, we can come from a position of authority, commitment, consistency, concession or reciprocity. Essentially, you do something for me, I do something for you. We can get people to like us. Scarcity, social proof. We'll go over each of those. Again, the reason we're going into this psychology is because this is how people are going to manipulate your employees. It does not matter what type of technical measures you have in place, because if I want to install my rootkit and I want your employees to run the executable I email, I'm going to craft that email in a way that's going to get them to click on that, or I'm going to give them a link to something that they're going to click on. So if you can patch anything, the one thing that you can't patch is the human factor. Position of authority. Simply, if people think that you're more important to them, then they'll listen to what you have to say. So let's say that you spoof a phone call as somebody's boss or CEO, and you immediately come up and you seem like you're totally pissed off and you want to say, oh, I need this check sent out to this company immediately. You need to get this done or you're going to lose your job. Depending on who you're talking to, you could have a lot of influence on getting something like that done. Commitment and consistency. So if people commit to an idea in writing or orally, then they're more likely to honor that commitment. So even if you take away the original incentive, they know that they've made that commitment and they're going to honor it. So if you think about social obligations and meetings, maybe you told somebody, 6 months ago that you're going to go to their dinner party or give a webinar. And even if you have that original incentive removed, you've made that social obligation and you're considered on the hook, so to speak. And if somebody can get your employees on the hook, if you can say, oh, hey, you committed to this 6 months ago, or kind of a slow burning buildup, that's something that can be manipulated by a social engineer. So again, the stick approach is what you usually see in these. The employee may think that, oh, I've already committed to this, whatever this event, hey, I signed up for this webinar, I need to click on this link. If I don't do it, I'm going to come off bad, my self-conception is going to suffer, etc. Concession is the next topic. Trust can be gained by giving before receiving. So if we volunteer something, if I offer something to you, like I give you a sample, then you're going to be more immediately have a positive emotional reaction and feel a sense of established intimacy. Doing a favor for someone is often seen as a way to make them your friend, but you ask them for a favor. You say, hey, will you do me a favor? Will you do this? They do something for you. And in their head, they're thinking, well, I'm doing this for this person because in some way I must like them. And so if we can even open a dialogue as a social engineer with a potential exploitable employee and say, hey, will you do this for me? Something as simple as, will you leave the door open for me? Maybe that comes a little later, but, will you send this off to your boss? Will you do anything? That might not be our initial exploit, but that could be enough to build a relationship with an employee and get that as a future exploit. And simply liking, kind of self-explanatory, people are easily persuaded by people that they like, including physical attractiveness. So now I was going to get into that a little later. How you present yourself, whether digitally or in person, can have a lot to do with how somebody's going to see you. If you walk in looking like a janitor versus you walk in looking like the CEO, you're going to have a very different sort of social influence. And again, last principle, scarcity. If you perceive something as rare or desirable, then someone's going to be more likely to try to obtain it. It's a supply and demand principle. You see this on infomercials all the time where, you know, we've got the first 100 quantities, or you've got to call in within the next 15 minutes because it appeals to that. Well, I need it right now. I need to make this action happen right now. And when you apply that to social engineering, you give someone a time frame. You say, not, hey, can you, you know, run this executable sometime within the next 6 months. It's, we need to have this document in this PDF signed immediately. This needed to be done yesterday. We've got, you know, 2 hours before this meeting. It needs to be done, needs to be done. People are going to put their common sense on hold and maybe put their ability to sit and rationally say, well, did I actually sign up for this? Is this legit? If they feel that that scarcity has been put on, you know, this document needs to be signed, it's all waiting on you, buddy, then they're probably going to open the PDF and install an executable. And social proof, people are more likely to maintain a belief if it's seen as socially acceptable. As the little graphic shows, you know, just getting people to stand in line. You can get people to stand in line without even knowing what it's supposed to be for. So if you can present that everybody's doing this, it's got to be the same thing. There's got to be something I need to do. It's another way you can exploit people. So even just showing a picture of a cute bunny, if you smiled, then you like me more. Elicitation, getting people to willingly share information under an innocent pretext. Social engineers will not ask for information. They will try to convince their target to volunteer it willingly. And so if you can create a situation where you've established a relationship with a potential exploitable employee, and you say, oh, you know, geez, I'm another employee. I can't believe that I'm, you know, locked out of the security room, for instance, or I can't believe that I forgot to write down the new pin that's going around, and there's your friend that's going to volunteer it versus, hey, can you tell me this? So elicitation, again, most people have the desire to be polite. And if you're professional, you want to appear well-informed and intelligent. And if you're praised, you'll often divulge more information. So as a professional, if somebody's approaching you and they're trying to put you on the spot as the expert, and hey, Mr. Expert, can you tell me this about this topic? You don't want to seem like you don't know what you're talking about. Even if you don't know and somebody's praised you as an expert, you're more likely going to volunteer that just based on that reputation. And again, that's something easily exploitable by social engineers. You can appeal to someone's ego. You can appeal to mutual interest. Let's say I'm targeting a CEO for a spear phishing attack, and I do a whole social network dive and see, yeah, this guy loves power boating. And so immediately I can approach him and casually drop an interest in power boating, and then be really impressed by his boat, and then volunteer some information. And hey, just between you and me, you know, I hear that whatever, there's going to be this invitational sometime for people involved in power boating. And it's just, you appeal to the person as an individual, and you appeal to their ego to where they're going to volunteer something. Social engineers will often frame their pretext appropriately, depending, again, as I've said earlier, depending on how you're dressed, depending on how you present yourself, both personally and digitally. If you are a method actor, if you're posing as an executive, so in person you could dress like one. If you're posing as an executive online and you've set up a fake website, you've set up maybe even a spoof email address from an exact CEO that you know exists, you come off again with a position of authority. And so that makes it more likely that you'll be able to influence someone. And any given hacking attempt, anything, has to get that foot in the door with, got to get an employee to run an executable. And so people who want to exploit you are masters at this. And then another consideration is just no-tech and low-tech hacking. You know, as Brad said, cybercrime in a literal sense deals with the internet, but everything is becoming connected to the internet now. And so we can even get something through a no-tech or low-tech approach, like dumpster diving, tailgating, follow somebody into a building, or even photoshopping credentials, photoshopping a parking pass, spoofing websites. Anything like that can give us an in digitally through the physical world. Let's say we do a dumpster dive and we find some documents that haven't been shredded. the point I'm getting to with this is you have to just think outside of the internet is the only realm where I can be hacked in, because any type of applied social engineering, applied psychology is going to bridge that gap. Just a quick definition, phishing versus spear phishing. You've probably all heard of, be aware that phishing emails are coming out where that's sort of the shotgun approach. You get the Nigerian prince who wants to share a bank account. Those are sent out to thousands and thousands of people all at once. They might get one of the 1,000 that reply. Spear phishing is what companies really need to be careful about, because this is targeted profiled attacks. As I've said, someone can do a social network dive, see what your hobbies are, see who your friends are, see what your cousin's name is, and then spoof an email from them saying, hey cousin, I'm in the hospital, I need something, I need some help. The main difference is you can get that hook because you can do the research. And if you're a big enough target, if somebody really wants to get into your company, they're going to do that research. We can look at some famous social engineers. Frank Abagnale Jr. is depicted in the great movie Catch Me If You Can. Could assume no fewer than 8 identities in his life, including an airline pilot, a doctor, a Bureau of Prisons agent, and a lawyer before he turned 21. This guy was a good enough con artist to convince people that he was all of these high-powered, very technically demanding positions, and now he's a security consultant. You kind of see a trend with that. Kevin Mitnick also, in '99, he was the most wanted computer criminal in the country, and now he's a security consultant. And he's also authored the great book, The Art of Deception, kind of the Bible on this topic. But his weapon of choice was the phone. He is often considered one of the great hackers of the time, but Kevin Mitnick would just pick up the phone and seem like a charming guy, call a bank and say, hey, I'm so-and-so. He's already done the research and I can't get into my account. Here's my information. Can you tell me this? Can you help me? It's appeal to, can you help me? And that still applies today. I call a USB stick a hacker grenade, because no matter what, if you get someone to plug in a USB stick, you can have a full control Trojan in there. And a lot of social engineering, as I've said, is bridging that gap between the real world, or even just that human communication through email, and getting someone to run a program. So let's say we just leave these in a bathroom, throw them through an open window, leave them in the parking lot. You're just trying to get someone to plug it in. This appeals to people in a couple different ways, because if someone finds a thumb drive, they're either going to be altruistic and think, well, this is somebody's thumb drive, I better plug it in and see what's on it so I can give it back to them. Or it's appealing to greed, where somebody finds this, and let's say it's a 512 gig thumb drive, and they think, oh, sweet, I scored something really interesting. Or even just their curiosity, put a label on this that says, private pictures. And somebody's going to wonder, whose private pictures? What are these private pictures of? No matter what, you're getting the same goal accomplished as a social engineer and as a hacker, and that's getting someone to plug this in. So that can potentially get, even if it's not in the server room, you can get that thumb drive into a machine. If you've crafted the malware properly, then you're in no matter what. That's an exploit that doesn't touch the internet, but then you've been compromised. Again, the power voting scenario. We live in an era where everything is online. It's just socially acceptable to put what we eat for breakfast online, what our hobbies are, how we feel about politics, especially, seems like a fun one. But no matter what, that information isn't going to go away. And if you're somebody in a position of power, if you're somebody in a position of influence within your company, and someone wants in, whether they're going to send an email or show up in a suit, they're going to do that research, and they're going to see what your interests are, how to map their interests so you seem like a likable person to them, or they seem like a likable person to you, and appropriately exploit you. Let's say even somebody comes in as a job applicant and they want to leave a thumb drive around. And so, oh, I got coffee on my resume. How can you leverage that? Well, I've got my thumb drive right here. You think I can just print out another copy? You've got some low-level HR employee that says, yeah, absolutely. Let's, go plug it in here, and you print out the PDF that has embedded malware and hand them your resume. And sure enough, yeah, you don't get the job, but you got your malware in. The whole reason I bring up these scenarios is just, you need to be able to think about these things outside of just, do I have software in place? Do I have hardware in place that will protect my computers? Because all of these exploits, all of these getting your foot in the door, it's not computer-based, it's psychology-based. And you can't patch human ignorance, for lack of a better word. you can train your employees to not only understand that phishing is the bottom of the barrel sent out to 1,000 people type of a thing, but you need to train your employees to be actively aware of these very targeted types of attacks. If they're getting an email from somebody who the email address is the same as their mom, for instance, or someone close to them, and they're trying to get them to click on something, or in any sense, if it's a little bit off, this is the landscape we live in. This is how people are getting into companies, big and small. I mean, a small company is an even better target because you have fewer employees. In an afternoon, you can do a full social network profile of everybody who works at the company. You can see who the most likely person to exploit is. And sure enough, probably within a week, you can get someone to simply open a PDF. That's it. You go to a web link, you open a PDF, you pick up a thumb drive. Again, if you're local and you're a small business and I'm Mr. Bad Hacker, it's just easy for me to go visit your premises and drop a thumb drive. But again, whole point of this is just think outside the box, think human factor, and train your employees to observe the human factor. Because when you think about cybersecurity, it's more than just what's running on the computers and what's running on the server. It's understanding this culture of security and understanding that no matter what, the initial exploitation is going to come through a gap in the human firewall. So I'm going to turn that over back to Jade. I think she's going to deal with Q&A. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dylan, Brad, and Neil. I would like to open it up for Q&A now. Submit your questions by typing in the question box of your webinar toolbar. We would also like to know if you found the information in this webinar to be helpful. So please take a brief moment to answer the poll and let us know. Okay, so we have one question. I'll read it out loud. If I am a business that deals with PHI, is it actually safer to transmit information via fax or email?
Well, this is Brad. I'll start on that. I guess the answer is yes, because you are making it more difficult for people to intercept and view that PHI. So if you can, as a practical matter, cause all of your PHI to be transmitted in a form which makes it more difficult to hack, then as a legal matter, I think that does help address some of your legal liability issues. I don't believe it gives you exculpation if for some reason the hack, the fax or the other copy is somehow still intercepted. I believe that would still be looked at as a hack that would expose you to those liabilities. But if anything you could do to make it more difficult, low tech and more difficult, I think is a good idea from a legal liability standpoint. Dylan or Neil, do you have any thoughts about using alternative modes of transmission of data?
Well, I agree that low tech can be an advantage, but it also is contingent on what your fax machine can store, because a lot of modern faxes have a memory buffer, they're connected to the network, and they're in all senses a computer like anything else. And so if, let's say, your fax machine isn't patched properly and that's the source of the exploit, it depends on the individual situation. If you're going to email it, I would say no matter what, use some sort of encryption, use some sort of data obfuscation. At the very, very least, send something in an encrypted container with a password. Just don't put it into an email and leave it sitting in your inbox with 10,000 other emails, because that's just asking for it.
And this is Brad again. Thank you, Dylan. I just wanted to add one additional comment. During Dylan's discussion, he made excellent observations about social media engineering and social engineering hacking. And I thought I should clarify. My comments were directed to any form of hack or incursion. So if I gave you the impression that those 5 risks only arise out of hacks that occur over the internet, that was incorrect. So to use Dylan's hypothetical, if someone gives you a flash drive and you plug it in and malware is installed and they are able to incur or hack into your network as a function of that, then those 5 legal risks still arise. So I didn't mean to give the impression that those legal risks only arise if your computer is connected to the internet. Clearly, that's the most prevalent form of exposure. But any one of the social engineering hacks Dylan mentioned certainly can give rise to those legal liabilities as well.
So they're also asking, would that be the same answer if using an eFax service?
This is
I would,
Brad. My answer's the same. Dylan, Neil.
I would again say it's the same, and it's potentially even more of a threat landscape. EFACs, if you're having a cloud-based service, if you don't know necessarily what servers they'll get stored on, how long they get stored for, if they're encrypted, anytime you outsource it to somebody else, that's something that you don't get to see hands-on. So again, I would use some sort of encryption no matter what, but understand where your data is going. That's a big thing.
Okay, and we have one more question. Have you seen any companies who do a very good job of educating their workforce on cyber awareness?
This is Neil Custer. Yes, some of a lot of the colleges and universities seem to be doing a very good job of educating their employees and requiring their employees to do periodic training, doing testing, doing pen testing, it's penetration testing. We see if people are biting on phishing or even spear phishing attempts. And so, yeah, I've seen that in the colleges and universities, and some major companies are doing that kind of thing also. Government agencies are starting to get on board more and more of doing those testing and training. So yeah, it's out there, and there are companies that specialize in that and doing employee training. Again, I think one of the main factors is you have to make sure that the employees that you do hire are willing to comply with the laws, and then to figure out or comply with your policies, and then to get them to stay aware of what these vulnerabilities could be, and periodically test them to see if they are doing what they're supposed to be doing.
And I would add to that there's a different sort of training in the sense that you can show or have a person sit through a presentation once every 6 months. People have a tendency to feel that they are above exploitation. And so if you can demonstrate that they can be exploited, if you can make someone feel stupid, people don't like to feel stupid. So penetration testing in your own organization, whether through an outside company or not, have someone send these fake phishing emails, have people click on it and have it be brought to their attention that, hey, this was a test, but you could have gotten infected with malware because you clicked on this thing or you opened this file when you shouldn't have. That's making it personal. That's bringing it from a PowerPoint to, oh, geez, I actually made this mistake, especially for people in a position of power in your organization. That's going to make a huge difference.
One of the things that we oftentimes will do in presentations we do to organizations is we'll get their email addresses of the attendees ahead of time, send out a phishing attack to them, and it's not uncommon for us to get a 70% hit rate on those phishing attempts. And so, and these oftentimes are people that are involved in the industry, they're law enforcement, security people, so they should know better. But it's amazing how many people will still fall for the bait.
This is Brad. If I might just add one footnote from a legal perspective, as part of responding to the question about companies who've done a good job educating, a critical part of that from a legal perspective is to have very good policies. Remember 5 years ago, everybody was looking for social media policies for their employees, but now everybody's wanting cyber liability and cybersecurity policies. So part of the education is to make sure that your company has good policies, which are supported from the top down, from the C-suite down, and which are implemented by HR, and every employee is aware of them. It will help you from a legal standpoint. If you get the practical benefit of education, but you get the legal benefit of having policies if you implement them and enforce them throughout your company, dealing with cybersecurity.
Maybe I could add a question that maybe, so what do you do if you get hacked? Maybe Brad?
Well, if you get hacked, the first thing in my experience is to try to implement your cyber response plan. This assumes, Neil, that you have a cyber response plan, right? So before the hack, it's important that you have at least thought about a cybersecurity incident response plan. And the elements of that aren't set in stone. We think that it would include doing what you can to identify the source of the hack, notifying law enforcement, notifying your insurance agent, becoming immediately aware of the compromised data. Was it encrypted? Becoming immediately aware of the location of the residence so that you can become aware of your data breach reporting obligations. One thing that's important, Neil, and with your background in law enforcement, you know how important it is to not make the job of law enforcement more difficult. So even though your immediate reaction might be to delete the reference to the event or hide the event or plug the hole, well, many times law enforcement doesn't want you to do that. They would like you to keep the incursion or the hack viable so that they can track it back to the source of the incident. So I think the answer would be, well, turn to your cyber incident response plan and follow it. And if you don't have one, I think you should prepare one. And the things I've suggested, Neil, are some suggested components of that cyber response plan. What do you think, Neil?
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the first steps is obviously, get a hold of somebody who understands how to respond and to save the data, save the evidence as much as possible. And obviously you have to determine not only if you were breached for sure, but did you lose any data? That obviously, as you would agree, is important in your reporting obligations. If you had a potential breach, but nothing is missing, or there's no evidence of anything being exfiltrated, then it may affect whether you have to report it or not.
So we are running out of time, although we have one more question. We'll just get back to you when the webinar is done, and I'll send that to Neil, Brad, and Dylan. But I want to thank you all for participating in today's webinar, and thank you again to Neil, Brad, and Dylan. This webinar will be posted on BBB's YouTube page as well as BBB's webinar homepage next week if you'd like to rewatch or share this information with others. I hope you all have a great day, and feel free to contact BBB with any further questions at 206-431-2227.